The 11 problems on page 5 I asked you to work for today, and I'm going to work those in great detail. And I want you to pick up on just one or two important things about percent. Problem 1 is probably the easiest problem on there. The sticker price of a motorcycle is $2,000. And the buyer must also pay tax, title, and license. They call it TT&L. The tax is 6.25% of the sticker price. This is critical. When you have percent of something in a word problem, pay close attention to that. And I'll tell you why today, in fact. Now, if you multiply that by 6.25%, you have to change that to a decimal by moving the point 2 places to the left. I bet you know that. By the way, this page 5 is not page 5 on the materials that you get from the bookstore. It's page 5 on the materials that I gave you, and they're out there in Canvas under files. So that's where you can find this, and I'll show that to you again later. So 2,000 times point, move the point 2 places to the left, you get 0.625. And you get $125, to which you add the 2,000. Now, and you get 2,125. Here is the first major big deal that I want you to understand today. And by the way, we're not finished with this. We still have to add 95 and add 55, and I realize that. But here's what I want you to know. If you take $2,000 and you add on 6.25% of $2,000, that is the same thing, really, as multiplying 2,000 by 106.25%, which is 1.0625. Why? Because 1 times 2,000 is 2,000, duh, and 0.0625 times 2,000 is the tax. And it turns out if you put them together with a 1.0625, you immediately get $2,125. Wow, cool. That's the cool way. Then you have to add the title of 95 and the fees of 55, and you get $2,275. And then you check your answer, which you may or may not know is on page 6. Oh my goodness, $2,275 is in right there. The left-hand column, the answers are all wrong, by the way. The right-hand, the middle column here, those are the correct answer. And the right column gives you some idea about a calculation that would do it for you. All right. Number 2, the $1,623.75. What people often tend to do, since that figure includes 8.25% sales tax, what some people try to do is take 8.25% of 1623.75 and subtract it. That doesn't work. The reason it doesn't work is that the sales tax is already in the 1623.75. The number before tax, we don't know. So here's what you have to realize. $1,623.75 is an unknown sale price plus 8.25% of that unknown sale price. Therefore, 1623.75 is actually 108.25%. So you have to divide that by 1.0825. And there's no other way that makes sense to do this problem. And that's the price before tax. Now you could take 8.25% of that and add it on, and you can verify that you get that. Or you could just multiply this by 1.0825, because the 1 is 100% of it, and the 0.0825 is 8.25% of it, and there you get that back again. Interesting. Number 3, you have something changes in price over time. If the price gets to be higher, that's a percent increase, and if it's lower, it's a percent decrease. So you work them all the same way, but you have to pay close attention to the details. For example, you subtract the 2, and you get 500. Now, this 500 represents the amount of increase. And you get the percent of that by dividing it by not the big number or the little number, but the older number. The older number is 8,000. So you divide that by 8,000 and you get that. And then it says, what was the percent increase? The answer is 6.25% because you change that to a percent by multiplying by 100. That's the answer. And you can check that on the next page. And by golly, there it is, 6.5%. Cool. Number 4, what most people do when they see this problem, they say, you know what, I'm going to put some money in the bank and I leave it for a year. And that's what simple interest is. Leave it for a year and you get your money back plus 5% of your money as interest. And I want that total to be $3,000. What you do not do is multiply 5% of 3,000. Why? Well, that's $150. And if you subtract that, you will get interest not on 3,000, but on 3,850. And that's not what we're looking for. What we have to do is recognize that the 3,000 is the amount you deposit plus 5% of the amount you deposit. That means 3,000 is 105.5% of your deposit. So you have to divide that by 5% by 1.05, and you get 2857.14. Now, this is critical for your grade. If it says to the nearest dollar, then you round it to the nearest dollar, which is where the 7 is. The nearest dollar is 7. You could leave it 7 or make it 8. It depends only on the dimes place. The 0.1 is 1 dime, and the 4 is 4 pennies. 1 dime and 4 pennies is 14 cents. The nearest penny would be 2857.14, but the nearest dollar is 2857. And if you round it off differently, you will lose points. Yikes. All right. So if something is 50% pork, 38% beef, then how much is the rest percentage-wise? Well, first of all, we got 65 pounds of venison. So let's see what this looks like. Here's a little pie chart. 50% of the ingredients, not counting the spices, just the meat, is pork. 37% is beef, and the rest is venison. What you need to recognize is that the total amount of meat is 100%, and that's why the venison is 13%, because 50 plus 37 is 87. Subtract 87 from 100, you get the 13%. Okay, well, so what? Here's the so what. The venison is 65 pounds, and that represents the other 13% of the total. So that means to figure out the total amount of meat, I have to divide that by, really, 13%, which is 0.13. When you change it to a decimal, you get 500. But that's not the answer. Why not? Because the question is how much pork. And if you tell me how much beef, that's not what I'm asking for. So 500 pounds, and the pork is 50% of the rate. So I multiply that by 50%, change to a decimal, is 0.5 or 0.50, it doesn't matter. So the answer is 250 pounds of pork. And I asked for beef, we would multiply that 500 times 0.37. All right. Here's a problem that involves a couple of things that are not well known. First of all, 7 3/4%, I need to change that to a decimal. To do that, I got to change the 3/4 to a decimal by doing 3 divided by 4, and I get 0.75. Then I add the 7, because 7 3/4 means 7 plus 3/4. Now, the barbecue station, this is a true story. I don't know if they still exist. They used to be over at Harry Wurzbach at Loop 410. And it's called the barbecue station because it used to be a gas station. Really. And now they sell sandwiches. And for simplicity, they rounded off their selling price to include the tax. So they wouldn't have to fool around with pennies and nickels and dimes and quarters. They just said, okay, $6 for a sandwich. So that means that the cost of the sandwich before tax plus 7 3/4% of the cost of the sandwich before tax is $6. So in other words, the cost before tax times 1.0775 equals $6. So yikes, I'm gonna add 100%. I'm gonna divide that by 100. So the 1.0775, that is 107.75%, which is what the $6 is. So I'm going to put that in memory. Then I'm going to take $6 and divide it by that number, 1.0. And the answer is $5.56 with 8 more. So to the nearest penny. And here's the thing, you are instructed by me in my class, always round to the nearest penny if it's money, unless I ask you to round it to the nearest something else, like the nearest dollar. So this is going to be $5.57. So $6 take away $5.57 is the quickest way to get the tax, which is 43 cents. You could just multiply by the tax rate, but this is quicker, I think. And you can check that answer. There it is, 43 cents tax and 5.57. And by the way, 43 cents tax is $.43. It is not 0.43 cents. In this case, there is such a thing as 0.43 cents, but it doesn't mean $0.43. All right. Number 7. Got this from a real estate agent. The real estate agent says, well, how much do you need after the commission of $81,780? That's what you want after I take my 6% of the selling price. What most people do is multiply 81,780 by 6% and add it on, and that doesn't work because the real estate agent doesn't get 6% of my share. The real estate agent gets 6% of the selling price, and that's critical of again. So that means if 6% of the selling price goes to the realtor, then what's left is the other 94%. So that's why you have to actually divide this by 94%, change to 0.94, and you get $87,000. Now, when the agent takes 6% of that and subtracts it, I'm left with 81,780, and I will let you verify that on your own. Okay. Number 8. This one is very, very tricky. 8 and 9 are tricky. A car dealer is going to discount the sticker price by 20% and then add 6.25% sales tax on the discounted price and then add $85 in fees. Now, this one and number 9 are so tricky that I put them out here for you. So here is number 8. It just repeated it. So there are 2 ways to work number 8. The usual way, most people say, okay, he's going to take 20% off. So let's multiply 18,000 by 20%, which is 0.2. That's 3,600. Subtract 3,600 from 18,000, and I'm left with 14,400. What I want you all to get today, really, yes, today, is that the cool way is instead of calculating the 20% that you're not going to pay, you can do a little mental math and say, well, if I'm not going to pay 20%, I must be paying the other 80%, which is exactly right. So I can calculate the 80% that you do pay and immediately get 14,400. That's cool. That's why it's called the cool way. Now you got to figure the tax. You can either multiply that sell price by 0.0625 and get 900 and add that on and get 15.3, or you can do it the cool way. Really, the cool way is 1 plus the tax rate, because 1 times 14,400 is 14,400. That's this one right here. And 0.0625 times 14,400 turns out to be $900, but we don't care about that. It's just a tax. So if you multiply that by 1.0625, you get 15,300. And then you add the $85 in fees either way, and you get 15,385. Yeah. Now, sometime like the next problem, you're going to get a similar problem, only you know the outdoor, you know the bottom line. If you know that the drive out cost is 15,385, if you know that, and you know that there's $85 in non-taxable fees, and you know the interest, the tax rate and the percentage discount, you can work it backwards if you know the cool way. First thing you do is you calculate 15,385 minus 85, and that gives you 15,300. And then that includes tax. Oh, and therefore that is 106.25% of something. So you divide that difference by 1.0625 and you get 14,400. And that number reflects a 20% discount. So this is the other 80%. So then you have to divide that by 0.8 and then you'll get the 18,000 back again. Now, the reason you need to know the cool way is problem 9 is a related problem, but in this case, you know what the total is. You know the fees and the tax and the discounted price are all been done already. So you can't take 15% of the sticker price if you don't know what it is. So what you have to do here is a similar calculation. You have to take the 15,432 and subtract the fees, minus 115. Divide that by 1 point the tax rate, because that's 106% of the selling price, and you get 15,000. Well, when you subtract the 115, you get 15,317. When you divide that by 1.06, you get 14,450. And when you divide that by 0.85, then you get what's called the answer, 17,000. Very, very cool. Tricky, but cool. We have much more time to go before the first test, so not to worry about that just now. Number 10, this guy wants to take some money out so that Rob's share is $4,800 and the IRS share is the other 33%. Just like for the venison, if the IRS gets 33% of the amount withdrawn, that is not 33% of Rob's $4,800. It's 30% of something bigger, and you do not multiply 4,800 by 0.33 and add it on, because the government doesn't get 4,800 times 0.33. You have to realize that 4,800, once the government takes its 33%, this is the other 87%. How do I get that? 100 minus 33 is 87. Is 67. So this is 67%. So I have to divide that by 0.67 and get 6,857.14. And it says to the nearest dollar, so it's either going to be 7 or 8, and the 1 is not big enough. If it doesn't say round it to the nearest dollar, then it would have the 14 cents on the end. So remember, if it's money in my class, if it's money, round it to the nearest penny, unless you're asked to round it to something else. Now, finally, problem 11. You have some grades, A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's, and you want to know what percent of these grades are A, B, C, D, and F. So you have to add these together. 5 and 12 is 17, and 20 is 37, and 4 is 41, and 2 is 43. And if you miss that calculation, you're probably going to miss everything. Now, round it to the nearest 0.1%. I will report to you historically that some students have trouble with this from day one, and they don't have it figured out by the final exam. They're still doing incorrect things. So where can I find? Here on page 6. And you get to use these materials on the final exam and every test. You get to use these. Here is an example. You add those up, and you better add that right by use the calculator. Then what you do is take each grade in turn, A, B, C, D, F, divide it by 43, move the decimal point 2 places to the right to change it to a percent. It's 11.62. but the 2 is not big enough to make it 11.7, and that's why the answer is 11.6. I even called your attention to it when you look for it later. Here it is. See the column on the right. So 12 out of 43 is 27.90. The 0 is not big enough to make it 28. If it were 27.2795, then you would make it 28.0, believe it or not. We'll talk about more later. 20 divided by 43 is that, and that's 46.5%. 4 divided by 43 is 9.3%. And finally, 2 divided by 43 is 4.65%. And the 5 is big enough to bump the 6 up to a 7. Yikes. And that is how you work all the problems on page 5. I am going to stop the recording.